At 0430 hours on October 27, 1944, USS Lexington's deck crews watched a concrete barge tie up alongside. They'd been in combat for 8 straight days. The barge carried 10 tons of ice cream. July 1943. The Pacific War had been grinding for 19 months. U.S. Navy Command faced a problem that had nothing to do with Japanese torpedo bombers. Sailors were breaking, not from combat, from heat, monotony, and shit food. Men stationed on carriers and destroyers in the South Pacific hadn't seen fresh milk in 6 months. Some hadn't tasted ice cream in over a year. Ships crossing the equator recorded deck temperatures at 130 degrees. Below decks, engine rooms hit 140. Men lost weight. Morale reports flagged increasing disciplinary issues. The Navy's Bureau of Supplies studied the data. They compared combat effectiveness ratings against time since shore leave. The numbers showed a pattern. After 90 days at sea without real food, fresh meat, dairy, anything cold, performance dropped. Reaction time slowed, mistakes increased. Minor injuries went up 40%. Admiral Nimitz read the report. The Pacific Fleet needed to stay at sea longer. Island hopping meant weeks between port calls. Supply lines stretched 6,000 miles from California. Fresh food spoiled in days. Frozen food required refrigeration the cargo ships didn't have. But one item stood out in every crew survey: ice cream. Men wanted ice cream more than they wanted steak, more than they wanted beer. The request went to Washington on July 14, 1943. Build ice cream production capacity in the forward areas. Naval Command approved it the same day. Not next week. Not next month. That afternoon. Construction funds allocated by 1,600 hours. The decision made no tactical sense. Japan held Rabaul, Truk, and half of New Guinea. U.S. forces were preparing to assault Tarawa. The Navy was building new carriers, destroyers, submarines. Resources were tight. Steel was rationed. Concrete was prioritized for airfields and bunkers. But someone in Washington decided ice cream mattered more than it should. August 1943. A construction crew in San Francisco started work on barge number 1. Not a supply vessel. Not a tender. A concrete barge designed to make ice cream. The specs called for a 200-foot hull with refrigeration equipment, pasteurization units, and mixing vats. The Navy gave them 8 weeks to build it. Standard barge construction took 6 months. The crew worked 3 shifts. They poured concrete in sections, curing each piece with steam heat to speed the process. Normal curing took 28 days. They did it in 7. The refrigeration units, commercial dairy equipment stripped from stateside plants, arrived on flatbed trucks. Installation crews worked under floodlights. By September 20th, the barge was operational, 7 weeks from approval to launch. The first test batch ran on September 23rd. The mixing vats held 500 gallons. They processed whole milk powder, sugar, and flavoring. The pasteurization cycle took 40 minutes. The freezing cycle took another 35 minutes. From powder to finished ice cream, 75 minutes. The barge could produce 500 gallons per day, more than any stateside dairy plant. They loaded it onto a transport ship October 1st. The barge crossed the Pacific in 22 days. It arrived at Espiritu Santo on October 23rd. By October 25th, it was making ice cream for the 3rd Fleet. The second barge launched from Mare Island in November. The Navy ordered 6 more. Production timelines dropped to 5 weeks. By January 1944, 3 barges were operating in the forward areas. By May, all 9 were running. But Washington didn't stop there. They started converting cargo ships, not for combat, for ice cream. Standard Liberty ships, 441 feet long, designed to haul tanks and ammunition, got retrofitted with dairy equipment. The first conversion took 18 days. The Navy pulled a cargo ship out of the rotation, gutted the hold, and installed industrial freezers. It went back to sea making ice cream instead of hauling bombs. The ships carried more than barges. Each one could produce 3,000 gallons per day. They operated while moving. One ship could supply an entire task force. The Navy designated them AG vessels, auxiliary general. Their official designation was reefer ships. Everyone called them ice cream ships. April 1944. Task Force 58 was preparing to hit Truk. The fleet included 12 carriers, 8 battleships, and dozens of destroyers. It also included 1 ice cream barge and 2 converted cargo ships. They arrived at the staging area April 12th. Combat operations started April 29th. The ice cream ships kept running through the entire operation. Deck crews on USS Enterprise watched the barge pull alongside on April 30th, 1944. They'd launched 190 sorties that day. 4 pilots hadn't come back. The flight deck was still clearing wreckage from a damaged Hellcat that had crashed on landing. At 1,820 hours, the barge started pumping ice cream aboard. Vanilla, chocolate, strawberry. 500 gallons transferred in 40 minutes. The crew lined up. They'd been at general quarters since 0400, 16 hours on station. The galley had been serving cold sandwiches and coffee for a week. The ice cream came up from the hold in steel containers. The mess attendants scooped it into bowls. No one spoke. They ate standing at the rails, watching the sun go down. The barge moved to the next ship at 1910 hours. It would service 6 carriers that night. By midnight, it would be empty. By 0600 the next morning, it would have another 500 gallons ready. The Japanese couldn't understand it. Intelligence reports captured later showed their confusion. Radio intercepts from Truk mentioned American ships that appeared to be carrying frozen desserts. Japanese command dismissed it as translation error. No Navy would waste resources on ice cream during combat operations. But reconnaissance photos confirmed it. Concrete barges with no visible weapons, no cargo cranes, nothing but refrigeration equipment and vents. One intercepted message from a Japanese destroyer captain reported engaging an American convoy. 3 transport ships, 2 destroyers, and 1 unidentified barge. The barge had no guns. The captain's report noted it appeared to be refrigeration vessel of unknown purpose. His command told him to ignore it and focus on the warships. They didn't know what they were looking at. The Americans were running an ice cream supply line 5,000 miles from California, servicing carriers in active combat zones, while the Japanese were rationing rice. The timing decisions kept accelerating. By June 1944, the Navy had ice cream ships operating from Saipan, Guam, and Eniwetok. The production expanded. A facility on Guam started making ice cream on land. A full dairy plant built on an island that had been a combat zone 3 weeks earlier. The first batch came out July 4, 1944. They produced 2,000 gallons that day. The expansion continued through the summer. By August, the Pacific Fleet had 20 ice cream production facilities, barges, ships, and island plants. Total daily capacity, 40,000 gallons, enough to give every sailor in the fleet a pint every 3 days. But the system had limits. The ships needed resupply. Milk powder, sugar, and flavoring came from California. The supply chain required cargo space. Every ton of ice cream ingredients meant 1 less ton of ammunition. Naval Command didn't care. They kept the ice cream ships running. September 1944. The fleet was preparing for Lake Gulf, the largest naval battle in history. Task Force 38 was operating east of the Philippines. They had 15 carriers, 6 battleships, and 3 ice cream ships. One of the ice cream ships broke down September 18th. The refrigeration compressor cracked. The Navy diverted a repair ship, a vessel designed to fix combat damage to destroyers and cruisers, to fix an ice cream ship. It took them 4 hours. They welded a replacement compressor and had the ice cream ship running by 2,200 hours. The battle started October 23rd. It lasted 4 days. The ice cream ship stayed with the fleet the entire time. They stopped production during combat but resumed the moment the guns went quiet. On October 27th, USS Lexington took a kamikaze hit. The explosion killed 50 men and started fires across the flight deck. Damage control got the fires out by 1,600 hours. At 1,630 hours, an ice cream barge tied up alongside. The crew had been at battle stations for 9 hours. They got ice cream at 1,700. The after-action reports from Lake Gulf filled 300 pages. Tactical analysis, Damage assessments, lessons learned. One footnote mentioned the ice cream ships. It noted they maintained operations throughout the engagement without disruption to combat effectiveness. No follow-up, no explanation. Just a note that they'd kept making ice cream while men were dying 200 yards away. By war's end, the Navy had built or converted 32 vessels for ice cream production. They'd established 12 shore facilities. Total production capacity exceeded 100,000 gallons per day. They'd served ice cream to every major combat operation from Tarawa to Okinawa. The final production figures showed they'd made over 5 million gallons between 1943 and 1945. The Japanese never built anything similar. Neither did the British. Neither did anyone else. Only the Americans looked at a global war and decided ice cream was a strategic priority. Only the Americans had the industrial capacity to make it happen, while simultaneously building 150 carriers, 200 submarines, and 700 Liberty ships. The ice cream barges got scrapped in 1946. Most of them were cut up for concrete aggregate. A few sat in reserve fleets until the 1950s. The converted cargo ships went back to hauling freight. The Navy kept one, AG-16, the first conversion, as a training ship until 1958. Then they sold it. No one kept records of where it went. The story disappeared from official histories. Most accounts of the Pacific War mention logistics, fuel, ammunition, replacement aircraft. Nobody mentions ice cream. The barges don't appear in ship registries. The production figures got buried in supply records. For decades, historians thought it was exaggeration. Then declassified documents confirmed it. The Navy really did build floating ice cream factories in the middle of a war. What the ice cream ships proved wasn't about morale. It was about scale. The Americans could afford to divert resources to ice cream because they had resources to spare. Japan was rationing fuel for training flights. The U.S. was building barges to make dessert. That disparity, more than tactics, more than technology, decided the war. The decision to build ice cream ships took 1 day. Construction took 5 weeks. Deployment took 3 weeks. From concept to operational ice cream barge, 9 weeks. That's faster than most nations could build a single destroyer. The Americans built 32 of them while fighting across 10,000 miles of ocean. This story spent 70 years in forgotten supply records and footnotes. If you think military history should include the absurd logistics that made victory possible, subscribe to Chrono's Combat. These details matter more than most battles. On October 27, 1944, USS Lexington's crew ate ice cream 4 hours after taking a kamikaze hit. That wasn't courage. That was American industrial capacity, and it terrified Japan more than any battleship.